Hong Kong, 1971. A second-floor restaurant above a narrow street where the neon flickers even before the sun has fully left. And the air is thick. Not with smoke. Not yet, but with something waiting to become smoke. You hear it before you see anything. The clatter of porcelain. The low hum of conversations that never quite rise above a certain level. Chopsticks tapping the edge of bowls. A chair leg dragging half an inch too far. And then you notice him. Not because he demands attention. Not because anyone points, but because the space around him behaves differently. Bruce Lee is seated near the window, back straight, not rigid, just aligned. Like nothing in him is wasted. Like even sitting is a decision, and his hands are still, which is the first thing that feels wrong, because everything else in the room moves. Slightly, continuously. People shifting weight, reaching, eating, breathing louder than they realize. But his hands don't move, not resting, not fidgeting, not adjusting. Just there, and the cup in front of him is placed exactly 2 inches from the edge of the table. Not 1, not 3, 2. And if you watch long enough, you start to understand something you weren't meant to notice. He is not relaxed. He is contained, like a coiled wire that forgot what it means to be loose, and the city moves beneath him. Hong Kong does not pause, it does not care. Outside, a tram bell rings. Someone shouts across the street. A motorbike passes too fast for the narrow lane, and inside, a man laughs, too loud, just slightly too long. 1.5 seconds longer than the room allows, and that's when the second presence enters, not quietly, not carefully, but not loudly either, because he doesn't need to be. The street fighter doesn't announce himself. He arrives, and you feel him before you look at him. Broad shoulders, slight forward lean, the kind of posture built from years of stepping into spaces and assuming they belong to him. His walk is not rushed, not hesitant. It's claiming. Each step lands like it expects the floor to hold, and people notice him. Of course they do. Not because they know him, most don't, but because of how he looks at things, not people. Things, tables, chairs, doorways, as if everything is either in his way or about to be. And when his eyes finally land on Bruce Lee, something shifts. Not in Bruce. In him. Because he doesn't see what's there. He sees what he expects to be there. A man sitting. Small frame. Quiet. Still. And stillness to him means softness, which is the first mistake. He doesn't sit immediately. He stands near the table, close enough to be inside Bruce's space, not close enough to touch. Testing distance without knowing that distance is already decided. And Bruce doesn't look up. Not yet. The cup remains exactly where it is, 2 inches from the edge. And the street fighter tilts his head slightly, not in curiosity, in evaluation. Like he's measuring something. Height, weight, reach, and getting all of it wrong. Because what he's measuring isn't visible. He pulls out the chair across from Bruce. The sound it makes is wrong, too sharp, too loud. It cuts through the room, and for a second, conversations dip. Not stop, dip. And Bruce looks up. Not fast, not slow, just enough. And it's not a reaction. It's acknowledgement, like opening a door you already knew someone would knock on. And their eyes meet. Which is where most people would say something happens. But nothing happens. Not yet, because this is the part no one understands. The part before anything moves. The part where the outcome is already decided, but no one knows it. The street fighter smiles. Not friendly. Not hostile. Confident. The kind of confidence built on repetition. On winning in places where rules don't exist. On being the one people step around. And he speaks. But the words don't matter. They never do in moments like this. It's how he speaks. Too casually. Too certain. Like he's already inside a story where he wins. And Bruce listens, not to the words, to the rhythm, to the spaces between them, to the way the man breathes after he finishes a sentence. And something becomes clear. This man has never met resistance. He couldn't push through, which is the second mistake. The cup is still 2 inches from the edge, and Bruce lifts it. Not to drink, just lifts it. Half an inch, and sets it back down. Exactly where it was. 2 inches, and if you're watching closely, you realize something else. The entire room has shifted around that movement. Not physically, but attention has bent. Conversations continue. Chopsticks still move. Someone laughs again, but softer this time. And yet everything is listening. Waiting for something it doesn't know how to name. The street fighter leans forward now. Elbows on the table, closing distance. Because, to him, proximity is control. And he thinks he's taking it. Which is the third mistake. Bruce's posture doesn't change. Not an inch. But something else does. The space between them tightens. Not visibly. But you feel it. Like the air has less room to exist, and the man across from him doesn't notice. Because he's looking at the surface. At the still hands. At the quiet face. At the absence of threat. And he mistakes absence for emptiness, which is where everything begins to end. Outside, the neon flickers again. A tram passes, and somewhere below, a door slams. And inside, someone drops a fork. The sound is small, but it echoes, because no one picks it up. Not yet. And Bruce speaks. Just one sentence. Soft. Measured. Almost unimportant. But it lands. Not on the man. On the moment. And the street fighter laughs. Shorter this time. But sharper. Because something in him felt that sentence and didn't like it. Didn't understand it, so he dismisses it. And dismissal becomes his fourth mistake. He stands. Too quickly. Chair legs scrape again. Louder now. And this time, conversations don't dip. They stop. Not completely. But enough. Enough for silence to have shape. And Bruce doesn't stand. He remains seated. Which is the detail no one forgets later. Not what happened. But that he didn't stand. The man reaches out. Not to strike. Not yet. Just to touch. A hand on the table. Close to Bruce's cup. Too close. Inside a boundary he doesn't see. And that's when the room changes. Not dramatically, not obviously, but permanently. Because something is about to happen that language will fail to hold. And everyone there will spend years trying to explain it. And failing, the fork is still on the floor, unclaimed, waiting, like the moment itself. Balanced on something no one can see. And then, no. Not then. Because even now you don't get to see it directly. You hear what people said after. You hear how they tried to describe it, how one man swore Bruce didn't move at all, that the other man simply wasn't where he was supposed to be anymore, and another insisted there was movement, but too fast. Not fast like speed, fast like absence, like the space between frames. And someone else said the table shook. But the cup didn't spill, still 2 inches from the edge. And that made no sense, because something must have happened. Something had to. Bodies don't rearrange themselves without cause. And yet, no one could point to it, not precisely, not honestly. Because whatever happened lived in a place words couldn't reach, and the man, the one who walked in like he owned the room, was no longer standing the way he had been, not broken, not destroyed, just corrected. Like a sentence rewritten without changing the words, and Bruce was still seated, hands where they had always been. The room didn't erupt. There was no chaos, no shouting, just a silence that had weight. And the fork on the floor finally stopped echoing, because someone bent down and picked it up. And the strange thing is, no one moves first, not immediately, because movement would mean choosing a side, choosing an explanation, choosing a version of reality that feels safe, and no one in that room feels safe. The street fighter is still there. Of course he is, just not in the way he was before. His hand is no longer where it reached, not near the cup, not near the edge. It's somewhere else now, lower, slightly turned, like it forgot its purpose halfway through existing. And his shoulders, they've changed, not dropped, not raised, just reorganized, as if something passed through them and reminded them they were not in charge. And his eyes are the last to understand. They search first, not outward, inward, trying to find the moment that just happened, trying to replay it, frame by frame, step by step. But there is no frame, no step, just a gap, a missing piece in time, and people will later call that gap many things: speed, precision, mastery. But none of those words fit, because those words still belong to effort. And what happened here did not feel like effort, it felt like inevitability. Bruce Lee doesn't look at him right away, which is what unsettles everyone even more, because if something had happened, something real, something forceful, you would expect attention to follow it. You would expect eyes to track it, to confirm it. But Bruce doesn't confirm anything. He reaches for the cup again, lifts it, half an inch. And this time he drinks, slowly, not as a statement, not as a gesture, just because it was time to drink. And that's when the room exhales, not loudly, not all at once, but in pieces. A chair shifts back somewhere in the corner. Someone clears their throat. Chopsticks resume their quiet rhythm against ceramic bowls. And the city returns, not because the moment is over, but because the city never left. Outside, the neon hums again. A motorbike passes. Voices rise from the street below like nothing of importance has occurred. And that's the part that stays with people. Not the movement, not the outcome, but how quickly the world refused to stop for it. The street fighter straightens, slowly now, carefully, as if sudden movement is no longer an option available to him. And his confidence, it's still there, but not where it used to live. It's quieter now, less visible, like it's been moved deeper inside where it can't be tested so easily. He looks at Bruce again. Rarely looks this time. Not at the frame, not at the size, not at the stillness, but at something else, something that was always there, but required the right kind of silence to see. And for a moment, just a moment, there is understanding, not full, not complete, but enough to know that he misread everything, from the first step into the room to the way the chair scraped, to the distance between a hand and a cup. He misread all of it, and Bruce sets the cup down, 2 inches from the edge, exactly where it began. And that detail, small, almost invisible, becomes the thing people remember most, not because it's dramatic, but because it didn't change, because everything else did. And that becomes the 5th mistake. Not his, everyone else's. They will spend years telling this story. In alleys, in gyms, in rooms that smell like sweat and wood and old ambition. And they will try to make it bigger. They will add movement, add sound, add impact. They will say Bruce stood, that he struck, that there was a blur, a flash, a sequence too fast to follow. Because that version is easier. That version lets the mind rest. But the ones who were there, They hesitate, every time, because they know that's not what happened, or at least not what it felt like, and feeling is all they have. The street fighter takes a step back. Just one, but it's enough to return space to the table, enough to acknowledge something without saying it. And he doesn't speak, which is the most honest thing he's done since he walked in, because words would reduce it, and reduction would be another mistake. Bruce finally looks at him again. Not long, not deeply, just enough. And there's no triumph in that look. No dominance, no victory, just recognition, like seeing something become what it was always going to be. And then he nods, once, small, almost unnoticeable. But it carries weight, because it ends something, not the encounter, something older, something the other man walked in with. And the street fighter nods back, not out of respect, not exactly, but out of alignment, like two lines that were never meant to cross, finally understanding where they belong. And he turns, walks back the way he came, same shoulders, same frame. But the space around him has changed. It no longer bends for him. It simply allows him through. And people watch him leave, not openly, not obviously, but they track him in reflections, in peripheral glances, in the slight tilt of a head that pretends to follow something else. And when the door closes behind him, there is no sound, not even the soft click you would expect, because the moment doesn't need punctuation. It already said everything. Bruce remains, seated, unmoved, and for a while nothing else happens, which is the point, because this was never about what happened. It was about what didn't. The strike that no one saw, the motion that no one could agree on, the gap that swallowed explanation. And the city carries it, quietly, like it carries everything. Stories don't stay in rooms like that. They leak, through conversations, through memory, through the need to explain something that resists explanation, and over time, the details blur. Names change, locations shift, the year becomes uncertain. But a few things remain. A man who didn't stand, a cup that never moved, and a moment that refused to be described. And somewhere, someone always adds a little more, a little louder, a little faster, a little clearer. Because clarity is comforting, but the truth was never clear. The truth was precise. And precision doesn't need noise. Years later, someone will ask a man who claims to have been there what he saw, and he will pause, longer than expected, as if searching not for the answer, but for permission to give it. And he will say something simple. He will say, "It wasn't what he did." And then he will stop, because finishing that sentence would require words that don't exist. And the listener will lean in, waiting. But nothing else will come, because nothing else can. And that's how the story travels, incomplete, unresolved, carried not by what is known, but by what isn't. And Bruce, he leaves the restaurant eventually. Of course he does. Not immediately. Not dramatically. He finishes his tea, places the cup down, 2 inches from the edge, and stands. Finally. And when he walks out into the Hong Kong night, the city doesn't react. It doesn't part. It doesn't pause. It continues, because the city is not there to witness greatness. It is there to absorb it, to carry it forward in fragments, in echoes, in stories told half-right by people who felt something they couldn't hold. And somewhere, years from now, another man will sit in another room, across from someone he believes he understands, and he will remember this story. Not clearly, not accurately, but enough to hesitate, enough to measure distance more carefully, enough to wonder if stillness might mean something else entirely. And that hesitation, that small invisible shift, is what survived. Not the moment, not the movement, but the correction, the quiet reordering of what power looks like, what it feels like, and what it refuses to announce. Because the most dangerous thing in that room was never speed. It was not strength. It was not technique. It was the absence of need. The kind of presence that doesn't prove itself, doesn't perform, doesn't escalate. It simply is. And when something like that meets someone who has only ever known force, there is no clash, no battle, no spectacle, just a realization. Too late to prevent, too early to understand. And that is what the crowd froze for. Not fear, not shock, but the brief, unbearable awareness that they had just witnessed something they would never be able to fully explain, and would never forget. The city kept it. The room released it, and time carried it forward unfinished. And the story should end there. Clean. Contained. A moment sealed in its own silence. But it doesn't. Because moments like that don't stay where they happen. They stretch, they echo, they find places to land long after the room has emptied and the table has been wiped clean and the cup has been moved by hands that never knew what it once meant to leave it exactly 2 inches from the edge. And somewhere else in the city, maybe the same night, maybe days later, the man who walked out carries it with him. Not visibly, not in the way stories usually show damage. No limp, no bruise, no sign. But something in his timing has changed. You see it if you watch him long enough. The way he enters a doorway now, half a beat slower. The way he looks at a room before stepping fully inside, not scanning, not claiming, just noticing. And that difference is small, almost nothing, but it is everything. Because before that night, he never noticed anything he didn't intend to control. And now there is a space between intention and action, a fraction, a hesitation. And in that hesitation lives memory, not of what happened, but of what couldn't be understood. He trains again, of course he does, harder maybe, or maybe just differently. The same strikes, the same drills, the same repetition that once built his certainty. But something interrupts it now. Not failure, something quieter, a question, unformed, unanswered. It doesn't ask what Bruce Lee did, it asks something worse. What was there before he did anything at all? And that question doesn't leave, it follows him, into every movement, every confrontation, every moment where he would have once stepped forward without thinking. Now he thinks, and thinking slows him. And slowing him changes him, and that change spreads. Because people notice. They don't know why. They don't know what happened in that restaurant. But they feel the difference. In the way he stands, in the way he chooses when not to move. And stories begin. Not accurate ones. Not complete ones. But fragments. Someone heard he challenged Bruce Lee. Someone else heard it ended quickly. Another says it never even started, and each version tries to fill the gap, to give shape to something that refuses shape. And the gap remains, because no one can agree on the moment itself, only on what followed. And what followed was silence. Not public silence. Private. The kind that lives in a person after they realize something fundamental was wrong. And across the city, Bruce continues, training, teaching, moving through spaces with the same contained stillness that was there in that restaurant before anything happened. And people try to understand him. They focus on speed, on technique, on philosophy. They write things down. They repeat his words. They imitate his movements. But the thing that mattered most, the thing that was present before any movement, remains just out of reach. Because it cannot be copied. It cannot be taught directly. It can only be recognized, and most don't recognize it. They see the aftermath, the effect, not the cause. And that is why moments like that become stories instead of lessons. Because stories are easier. Stories allow distance. They allow exaggeration, decoration, resolution. Lessons require something else. They require admission, and admission is heavier. Years pass. The restaurant changes. New owners, new tables, new cups. The window still looks out onto the same narrow street, but even that street has shifted. Different signs, different lights. The neon hum is still there, but it speaks a slightly different language now. And no one sitting there knows what once happened above that street. No one measures the distance between the cup and the edge of the table. No one listens for the exact moment a room stops breathing. Because those details were never written down. They were carried, quietly, in the bodies of the people who were there, in the way they told the story, in the parts they couldn't say. And one day, years later, someone who heard the story secondhand tells it again to a younger man, in a place far from that city, different country, different time, same kind of room. And the younger man laughs at first, because it sounds impossible, because it sounds incomplete, because it doesn't give him what he expects. No clear movement, no decisive blow, no satisfying conclusion. And he says something like, "So what actually happened?" And the older man pauses, just like before, and he answers the same way. "It wasn't what he did." And again, nothing follows. Because the truth hasn't changed. Only the distance from it has. And the younger man sits with that. At first, it frustrates him. Because he wants something concrete, something he can visualize, learn, repeat. But over time, maybe days, maybe months, that sentence begins to shift inside him. It wasn't what he did. And slowly, it stops being frustrating and starts being unsettling. Because if it wasn't what he did, then what was it? And that question, that quiet, persistent question, is the only accurate inheritance of that moment. Not the movement, not the outcome, the question. And that is how it travels. Through uncertainty, through incomplete retellings, through pauses that last just a little too long, until one day someone doesn't ask for the rest of the story. Because they understand there isn't one. There never was. There was only a moment where everything unnecessary fell away, and what remained didn't need explanation. Back in that restaurant, in that year, in that city, the crowd froze, not because they saw something extraordinary, but because, for a fraction of time, they saw something stripped of performance, something without excess, without hesitation, without the need to prove itself. And that kind of thing, when it appears, it doesn't announce itself. It doesn't demand attention. It simply rearranges the space around it and leaves. And what it leaves behind is not fear, not awe. Something quieter, a recalibration, a subtle shift in how people understand presence, power, distance, and the cost of misreading stillness, because the man who walked in that night made several mistakes, not loud ones, not dramatic ones, but precise. He mistook stillness for weakness. He mistook proximity for control. He mistook absence for emptiness, and each mistake moved him closer to a moment he could not interpret. And that is the part that matters. Not that he lost, not that Bruce Lee proved something, but that misunderstanding, when carried far enough, doesn't end in conflict. It ends in correction. Immediate, silent, irreversible. And the same city that hummed outside the window, carried that correction forward. In fragments. In altered behaviors. In the slight hesitation of someone who once would not have hesitated, and that hesitation became the echo. Not the movement, not the moment, the echo. Because echoes last longer than impact. They travel further. They reach people who were never there, and they ask a question that never fully resolves. What did you miss before anything even happened? And that question, that quiet, persistent, almost invisible question, is the real story. Not of a fight, but of a misreading. Not of action, but of presence. And of a man who never needed to stand to end something that had already begun to collapse. The cup remained 2 inches from the edge, exactly where it started, exactly where it ended. And somehow, that was the most accurate description anyone ever had.